Flying is a matter of hours and hours of boredom, punctuated by seconds of sheer terror. And the life of a fighter pilot in the Pacific in those days was pretty much that. VF-17 was formed on January 1st, 1943 in Norfolk, Virginia. A VF is Navy nomenclature. The V is fixed wing, H would be a helicopter, and F is fighter, so it's a fixed wing fighter squadron. Tom Blackburn had gone on a fairly brief operational combat tour on North Africa. He was called back to Norfolk. He was tasked with starting VF-17. He was given little to start with. Early 1943 was still early in the war for the United States. We still didn't have a lot of airplanes, we still didn't have a lot of pilots, and a lot was going on to form these squadrons to go over the Pacific, where there was a lot of fighting going on already. As Tom Blackburn was building his squadron, he was getting whoever he could get, and so were the other squadrons. There was much more need than there were pilots. So as pilots came into Norfolk, then they were kind of picked off as they could. Tom had initially picked off as many experienced pilots as he could, and that wasn't very many. And then they started coming just right out of flight school. And bit by bit, he built them up. From his operational experience and really just from his personality, he really wanted to have a gung-ho squadron. All fighter pilots are like that, but he really had the feeling he wanted to stand out from the crowd. He got the reputation of being a bit of an outcast. They eventually were called Blackburn's regulars, and he embraced that. And so he looked for gung-ho pilots, but some that were maybe less interested in authority and more interested in going and flying airplanes and fighting the enemy. Blackburn jumped right into training and organizing a squadron. What these pilots had to do, though, was fly in the airplane they could scrounge up around Norfolk. But they were going out and simulate air combat, fly formations. However, they were doing it probably to the nth degree. They had this reputation in Norfolk of being aggressive, being annoying, and Blackburn, his attitude was, this is what we're supposed to do. This is what we're going to do. And his pilots, which eventually numbered at that point around 40 pilots in the squadron, and they all embraced that attitude. But at that point, for not the first time, Blackburn was called on the carpet, the base commander. He said, look, this is it, I've warned you. So what he did was he sent them to the farthest place they could find, and he sent them to the Outer Banks, to Manteo, where there was a brand new airport. So it was built as a auxiliary airfield, just planned for practice. There wasn't much there, but VF-17 came down and took up residency, and it was really good because when they got here, there weren't the distractions there were in Norfolk. So the squadron was able to concentrate on learning their procedures, learning their tactics, shooting guns, dropping bombs, and basically bonding also, because they had no club here and that was about it. They could do all the missions they were doing without upsetting the locals, because there weren't that many locals. That doesn't mean they didn't get a reputation here also, but they could just go out over the water and do their flying. There weren't that many other airplanes around here, so they weren't attacking other groups of aircraft that might not appreciate it. They were here about 3 months, I think it was, and probably in April of 1943 started getting the Corsair. The Corsair was a brand new airplane. It turned out to be a fantastic airplane, one of the best of the war, but it was a pretty difficult airplane to fly. It was a lot more powerful than any of these pilots had flown before, including Tom Blackburn. The aircraft, the manufacturer, Vought had called it the Corsair, and the Corsair is the name of a ship that pirates used, and the skull and crossbones was, of course, the symbol of pirates, so they put that on the airplanes. It was the first aircraft designed to have the R2800 engine, so it was a very powerful engine, the horsepower, and it made the airplane a little harder to fly because of that power, but very bulletproof in terms of its reliability and so on. These pilots, in VF-17, when they went out the Pacific, they had a couple hundred hours of flight time, and that's a brand new pilot. And they didn't have any experience in combat, but they had very little experience in general. And now they're flying this very powerful airplane, and it was difficult to fly. So we had a new squadron, we had new pilots, we had a new airplane, and they were in fact waiting for a new aircraft carrier to be completed, the Bunker Hill, which would then take them to the Pacific, where their assignment was going to be. And because of the way that the aircraft was designed, with the wing further back than a typical aircraft, that meant that on a landing, that propeller with a straight wing was going to be pretty close to the deck. So they built the gull wing so that the landing gear could be at the very bottom of that V and make it sit up a little higher. Carrier landing is a controlled crash, and so that the struts go down, the gear goes down, the propeller goes down, and this helps avoid propeller strikes on landing. They had made some carrier landings up off of Norfolk. They made some, but they weren't that qualified as far as carrier landings, but they were as far as the rest of their operational practice. By August of 1943, the Bunker Hill was ready. They were loaded on the Bunker Hill and headed out towards the Pacific. Landing on an aircraft carrier was very difficult in this airplane. Even for experienced pilots, it was difficult. Most of this squadron, VF-17, the pilots were brand new. Your throttle and your stick are moving constantly like this. And every time you're moving that power, you are upsetting the dynamics of the airplane. And VF-17 was planned to be carrier-based as they went out to the Pacific. But the early experience with pilots flying the Corsair, especially new pilots, was it was difficult to land on the carrier. And they were losing pilots on carrier landings. What they did was VF-17 and other squadrons, they based them on land at first. Now VF-17 never wound up being permanently based on a carrier, but they certainly made carrier landings during their time in the Pacific. During a skirmish, they might wind up there for fuel. They may have been signed there for a certain mission or something like that, but it was more practical to base this new airplane and these new pilots on land. Their assignment was in the Solomons. That's where the main fighting was going on at the time against the Japanese ground forces and air forces. The Solomon Islands are kind of long and thin, and the Japanese occupied most of them, but on the eastern end of the Solomons, there are several bases that the US occupied, so the VF-17 was stationed there. It's very difficult to recognize another airplane in the air, especially when you're flying at 500 miles an hour and the other one is too. Pilots spend hours and hours on aircraft recognition, and they're recognized by silhouette, right? So every aircraft has a silhouette, but fighters all tend to have a similar silhouette because they're built kind of the same way with a big engine out front and wings and a tail. And then you get a lot of other clues too. Some airplanes put out different exhaust patterns, so you're looking at what type of formation they're flying. Are they coming from the east or the west? That type of thing. Lots of clues, but it's not easy to know what kind of airplane is this and friend or foe. It comes up a lot of times whether these airplanes had radios and did they, could they talk to each other, and they did. For the first part of the mission, radio silence is important. If you break radio silence, then the enemy hears that and can figure out what's going on and where you're from. But once the skirmish starts, then all bets are off, so then they start talking to each other. Their first encounter with the enemy resulted in 5 kills in one day, but Ray Beecham, as it was noted later, got the very first one. He got on the tail of a Zeke, which is the Japanese Zero. Everybody called them Zeeks. And at first, got away. The Zeke went down low. Beecham got back on his tail and shot him down. It was a fairly quick encounter, which most are. And it was a good day for VF-17. The squadron started building a reputation and building kills, losing occasional aircraft, which you're going to do more, but really became pretty successful. That R-2800 had water injection. They had water tanks that they could momentarily squirt water into the pistons, which would allow just a little bit extra horsepower. So one of the encounters that Ray Beecham had, and I think it was his second kill, he was able to use that to get a little extra speed to get away from someone who had been attacking him. Ray came back around, got on the tail of the Zero. That's when the Zero escaped the first time, and then he caught him the second time and shot him down. When that Zero went in, Ray, on the hunch, he came back around and saw that the pilot had gotten out and was in a dinghy, and he called it in, and a PT boat came out and rescued that pilot. But that's a very important thing. When you can get a captive pilot, you very possibly can get some good information from him. So that was another big plus of that second kill. So VF-17 really was successful because of the leadership and the attitude that Blackburn fostered. And they wound up at the end of the war having around 150 kills and being the top scoring Navy squadron in the Pacific during World War II. Over their 2 tours, they probably had 50 or 60 pilots in the squadron. They wound up with 13 aces. An ace is someone who has 5 kills. It's a real benchmark for fighter pilots, difficult to attain. The other thing is they survived the war, and many, many of their friends and comrades didn't. So to them, it was really nothing to brag about. For a successful squadron like this, every pilot has to be very good at that job and contribute to the success of the squadron. But I think it's more of a matter of being humble than anything else. Humble about having survived it when a lot of people didn't.